Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here, Risa. Thanks for having me.
Oh no, I'm so excited to talk with you today. Actually, I have to admit I'm not a good faster, so the fact that you came up with your whole the Mimeo product, which we're going to get into, is kind of a game changer on many levels, and especially for people like me. Um, But before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of everything, uh, to provide some context for the audience,
Yeah.
I'd love to know, have a little bit of background on you, Chris. Like, where are you from? How did you start to get into the longevity space, fasting, and all that stuff? And so, tell me, like, where does this story begin?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, story began in 1990 in a hospital in Pennsylvania, but like I won't go that far back, right? So really the story began when I got out of college. So I did my bachelor's of science in biochemistry from Loyola Marymount University down in LA. But like a lot of kids, I came out of college and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with the degree that I had, right? I knew I wanted to be something in research, but just didn't really have that big of a direction on what lit me up inside, what I was passionate about. So I took an immunology fellowship at Stanford. I was there for 2 years and like such a great nurturing environment. You can find out anything you want to find out there, right? So I just really dove into the literature, dove into seminars, anything I could get my hands on to try and figure out what I really wanted to do and what was interesting for me. And eventually,
Why immunology?
oh, well, immunology was actually just one of the things that I was interested in at the time. So inflammation is one of these processes that kind of underlies all biological disease, right? Cancer, autoimmune diseases, of course, neurodegenerative diseases, cardiovascular disease as well. Inflammation is kind of just a part of all of it. It was one of those things where I thought, okay, if we can study inflammation, if we can kind of figure it out, then it can apply to a lot of different areas. So it's just a really great baseline of understanding a core part of biochemistry and science that can lead you in a lot of different pathways, which of course it ultimately did.
Right. No, and I guess it's in a way that you didn't really expect, right?
No, for sure. Definitely
So then you
not.
ended up getting your PhD.
I did, yeah. So when I was at Stanford, I really, really got into the longevity side of things. As Stanford has a really amazing longevity program, and what really lit me up about longevity and healthy aging research was that it was something that used to be relegated to myth, right? It was, this kind of like Ponce de Leon, like fountain of youth style equation, but was now suddenly becoming this active area of real scientific rigor and research. And in that same vein of inflammation being involved in everything, aging is also really involved in everything, right? Like on the whole, young people don't really get sick, right? It's only as we continue to age and dysfunction and decline kind of accumulates that then these diseases pop up. So if you can keep people, younger for longer, then you can really delay that onset of almost all disease and all decline. So this one thing that helps with everything. And when you're eventually, like when you're in the longevity space, eventually you come across fasting and caloric restriction because they're one of the only ways that we really know of that can reliably extend lifespan in model organisms. And down that same track, they can also be very beneficial for extending health span. So the amount of time that organisms are actually healthy and functional before they die, right? Like hopefully the goal is to make health span and lifespan the same amount, but usually that's not the case. But what I found really interesting about fasting was that it helps extend lifespan, yes, but it also helps to treat, prevent, or delay most major diseases that health span
Why?
out.
Why is that? What is
Yes,
it doing that it's
absolutely. So when you think about it from an evolutionary point of view, when we're in an nutrition state, like when we're in this Western diet that we kind of experience all the time, this 3 meals a day plus snacks, we're basically sending our body this evolutionary signal that there's nutrients all around us, right? The environment is rich and plentiful. If we have any problems that are happening with our cells, if we have damage that happens, like it's not a big deal, right? We can just make new cells. We have the energies to be able to do that. We don't really have to be very efficient about our metabolism. We can make proteins at a fast rate. We can do all the DNA transcription that we want to do. Because we just have all these resources around. So we don't have to run clean. If something goes wrong, I'll just make a new cell, I'll just make a new protein, I'll just, do something to just like fix the damage whenever I get to it. But in a nutrient deplete state, in a state like fasting, all of a sudden your cells kind of have to stand at attention because all of a sudden there's no nutrient around. So if something does go wrong, they don't have the energy to be able to replace that cell anymore. So that sends the signal to our cells to essentially optimize a lot of their functionalities for survival and longevity and metabolic efficiency. So we'll turn on pathways like autophagy, that's our cellular recycling processes that'll break down dysfunctional or damaged proteins and organelles to their constituent parts to make new, better functional ones. They'll turn on stress response elements to make sure that we're maintaining the health of the cells, keeping them protected from harm. We'll stop doing as much DNA replication, stop doing as much protein translation, all to help keep the cells as healthy as possible for as long as possible, so then the organism itself can actually go and find a nutrient rich environment, and kind of the cells can go back to being lazy again.
Right. So, and so this is scientifically proven, right? And that's, I mean, intermittent
Oh yeah.
fasting is like the new buzzword, or maybe it's not so new anymore, but how you should eat within a 6 hour period during the day, or an 8 hour period during the day. Um, so so when we're doing this, I'm assuming that you're doing this every day, or because I've also read research where it's better if you're, fasting for 36 hours or that sort of thing, where it's longer fasting period, and then you break the fast.
Right,
Uh,
absolutely. So there's a ton of scientific literature on fasting that's out there right now, and really where you see the best longevity enhancement with fasting is typically done in what's called alternate day fasting. So that's one day of eating, then one day of fasting, one day of eating, one day of fasting, and then repeated essentially throughout an organism's lifespan. And then there's gradations within that as well, right? So there's plenty of studies on 36 hours of fasting, 48 hours, 72 hours. There's medically supervised fasting clinics that are out there that will take people to 1 week of fasting, 2 weeks of fasting, 3 weeks of fasting to really help.
what?
Oh yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of credence to it too. You can see they have case studies out the wazoo of people who have autoimmune diseases like lupus coming in and getting like 6 months of symptom ablation from 2 weeks of fasting, because it really acts as this immune system reset and regeneration. Or you have people who come in with type 2 diabetes who can kind of actually take themselves out of that diabetic range just through 2 weeks of fasting. So there's some really, really interesting case studies, very beneficial for a lot of different indications. But yes, like typically you get a lot of these benefits, and especially the lifespan extension benefits through longer periods of fasting. Whereas what we have now and is more mainstream is that intermittent fasting, time restricted eating style programs where you're condensing your eating window down into, a 6 hour period, a 4 hour period, an 8 hour period, whatever it may be. And there are definitely benefits to that. Studies have shown that there are these changes in both metabolic and cardiovascular health indications. So you can help control glucose levels, insulin levels, triglyceride levels, cholesterol levels. But some of the more, whole body reset elements of fasting don't really kick in until around 20 to 24 hours of fasting. And that's because that's around the time that it takes your body to totally deplete its carbohydrate stores, its glycogen stores. and then truly switch over into more of the fasting metabolism, which is more reliant on endogenous fat supplies, and entering into ketosis. So that's kind of around the true like fasting switch mark where you really enter into it and start seeing these more holistic metabolic shifts and changes that lead to the regenerative responses.
That's crazy. And I feel like most people have a very difficult time fasting.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
for
to
sure.
be
It's
honest, that's me. Like, if I skip a meal, I'm like, you see, I could do. I do try to eat dinner earlier now and then eat breakfast the next day later, and then I consider that my my intermittent fasting. Um, so, clearly for the majority of us, unfortunately, the supermarket's way too close. The refrigerator is way too close for us to not grab something all the time, which is a horrible habit, but it's realistic. Um, does fasting have anything to do, like, is it more effective, like, the younger you are? Does it matter? Like, if you're 60, 70 years old and start fasting at that point versus, you're 30 years old, does it have any difference?
For sure, yeah. There's always going to be some differences, right? And fasting, just like everything else, is a nutritional intervention, right? So it's going to be the most effective the earlier you start it. A good analogy here is if you think of fasting like eating salads, right? If you start eating salads when you're 30 and then project that up, you're going to be a lot healthier when you're 90 versus if you were only eating, fast food and hamburgers up until the point where you were 65 and then started eating salads, you're not going to have that same length of time for the benefits to really be able to build up and accumulate, or, that time for the damage to be prevented, right? So fasting being initiated, at 25 years old and then moving forward, that's where you'll probably see the best benefits. And that's true of every lifespan intervention, is that the earlier you start, the more benefits you have, mainly because it has more time to actually take effect and be preventing any damage that might be occurring over time.
Right, right. So tell me a little bit about Mimeo, which I've started taking just a few days ago. And so, how fasting inspired you to do more research to figure out how you can, take a supplement essentially
Yeah,
and create the
exactly.
same
So, I
effect.
mean, the challenges with fasting that you're talking about are also something that I think a lot of people experience. I was very much into this like hardcore fasting lifestyle. Like I said, when I was at Stanford, I got like really, really enthusiastic about it. I was in an immunology lab. I was reading all the cool things that fasting can do for the body. So I thought to myself, okay, great. Like, why don't I just try this out? I'll do alternate day fasting and I'll actually take my own cells, track my own metrics, and see what we can move around. And I saw that there were, within my own cells, when I did a 36-hour fast, these profound changes that happened in my cellular functionality, in the way that my immune cells responded to various stimuli that were incredibly beneficial, like great response, like increased stress response, decreased inflammatory reactivity. So that is what lit me up inside, and I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to dedicate myself to this lifestyle. But so I started doing alternate day fasting, and I did that for 2 years. But I really got burned out on it because it's not something that's easy to maintain for your entire life, right? And like we were talking about before, you kind of need to maintain it for your entire life to get the maximal benefits out of it. So around the 2 years in, when I was starting to transition into graduate school at UC Davis, where I got my PhD in nutritional biochemistry, I was just really burned out on it. You get this weird element of social isolation that happens as well. And I was like, there has to be a way that we can figure out how to recreate these benefits, get like trigger the same pathways, trigger the same responses, but without actually having to undergo that arduous process of lifelong fasting. And that's what really catapulted me into my graduate research that ultimately led to Mimeo. So just to kind of, intro, because I don't think that we've talked about it on the call yet, Mimeo is a fasting mimetic that was designed from actual clinical research that I was doing at UC Davis to recreate the same molecular responses that happen in the body during a fast so that we can get the benefits of fasting, but without actually having to fast. So that's kind of, Mimeo in a nutshell.
Right. So what do you mean by mimetic?
Yeah, so mimetic just basically means mimicking. So, like a caloric restriction mimetic or a fasting mimetic is essentially a molecule that can activate the same pathways that would otherwise be activated by caloric restriction or fasting, but through a molecular means rather than that actual calorie restriction or fasting element.
Right. So these guys, I mean, it looks like a regular supplement, right?
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
absolutely is a regular supplement. So yeah, though what Mimeo is essentially, and where all the science came from is essentially it's recreating what happens in the body during a fast in order to essentially trick your cells into activating those same fasting pathways even when you're eating. So the way that we actually discovered this was we had 20 people come in, 10 men, 10 women, and we had them fast for 36 hours. And what we saw between the baseline state and the fasting state, very similar to what I saw in my own cells, was that there was this profound functional enhancement there. So their plasma became more anti-inflammatory, it became more antioxidant, it became more cardioprotective. Their metabolic indications became much more healthy and in line. And that was really exciting to us. We wanted to know, okay, what's the difference between the baseline state of plasma and the fasted state of plasma that could be causing those beneficial effects? So we did what's called comprehensive metabolomics, basically looking at all the different small molecule components of the plasma. And what we found was that there are these unique molecules that were upregulated during a fast, that were only elevated during a fast, and those were the ones that were essentially responsible for triggering these beneficial regenerative pathways within cells that could then create the benefits of fasting that we were seeing. So then when we identified those molecules, combined them together, and gave them back to people as a supplement, what we found was that we could recreate these beneficial effects of fasting even when people were eating. And then because we were really curious about the longevity elements of this as well, right? That's kind of the whole reason why I started getting into fasting in the first place. We did a lifespan experiment with C. elegans, which are essentially little nematode worms, a very common and a very high throughput method of determining, the lifespan extension potential of various molecules. We took the fasting mimetic formulation, gave it to the C. elegans throughout their entire life, and we were able to extend their lifespan by 96% without having to fast at all. So yeah, essentially doubling their
wow.
lifespan just through supplementation with Mimeo.
Wow, that's crazy. So this is not a diet pill though, I
No,
assume.
this was not
I mean,
intended to
people are
be.
not going to lose weight by taking this supplement.
So what I will say is that that's definitely not its intended purpose. However, a lot of the molecules that are in Mimeo behave as these master metabolic regulators, and they do actually have their own clinical evidence behind them individually that show that they can be very helpful for optimizing and maintaining metabolic health and then losing weight as well. So one of the molecules that are in there, oleoyl ethanolamide, which is always fun to say, rolls right off the tongue. It's actually involved in the gut-brain axis where it helps to stimulate satiety, helps to suppress appetite, and yeah, it's been shown in clinical studies to help people, naturally lose weight without altering their diet, just because they aren't as hungry, they don't eat as much. It helps, get them to a state of fullness much faster. And then some of the other molecules in there, like spermidine and palmitoyl ethanolamide, they are really involved in switching over the metabolism of the cells from burning carbohydrates to more burning fat and becoming more metabolically efficient, kicking off autophagy and those metabolic recycling pathways. So in that vein, like yes, because we're stimulating these fasting style pathways that are more about breakdown and catabolism, you are shifting your cellular metabolism around to prioritize, burning fat and increasing satiety. But the intention of the product is to be more of a holistic cellular health, healthy aging, and longevity focus, really focusing on the holistic health, not just, weight management, although that is a component to it.
Right, right. Which would make so many people so happy.
No, it would. I would love to be able to make the claim, right? But, coming from a nutrition background, I do really want to be, straightforward and upfront with people that like, yes, this can really support a weight loss journey, a healthy weight management journey, if that's, the course that people are on, because, it does have that appetite suppression effects and it can make journeys like that a bit easier. But I also know that it's only in combination with diet and exercise, right? It's not going to be a miracle fat burner.
Right, right. Which is what essentially people really want. But yes, with no work, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so
The American ideal of everything in a pill.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, so what are some of the other kind of, I don't know if you want to call them side effects or, essentially what else could manifest itself by taking this? Because and then at what point, I mean, are you taking this for the rest of your life? Are you taking it, for a specific period of time and then resting or um, how are you kind of what's your approach?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I would say that Mimeo is best to be taken in the long term for sure. Like we were talking about before, the longer you're on these, longevity interventions, the more effective they're going to be for you, and the earlier you start, the better. So, Mimeo would be a lifelong, accompaniment to everything else that you're doing to kind of promote your health and longevity journey. In terms of how to use it, I would say that as with anything, it's probably best to do a little bit of cycling. So you could be on Mimeo for, 2 months and then take a week off to kind of, let your body have a break, resensitize yourself to some of the molecules. Because there are actually, acute benefits that you can feel from Mimeo. It's not just a like underlying, I'm taking your word for it kind of thing. So like we talked about a little bit before, the oleoyl ethanolamide that's in there does have those, metabolic regulation and those appetite suppression effects. So that's one benefit that you can get from Mimeo. Another, the palmitoyl ethanolamide that's in there, which is the same category as oleoyl ethanolamide, but slightly different. It's actually an endocannabinoid, and its mechanism of action is going into brain cells and stimulating the release of anandamide, which is one of the body's bliss molecules. But it's been shown clinically to be very helpful with pain relief, with mood elevation, and then also decreasing neuroinflammation. And then spermidine is in there as well, so that's very great. That's for enhancing autophagy, and then especially neural autophagy. So it's been shown in clinical studies to be really helpful for increasing cognition and focus, and especially helping with folks with dementia or cognitive decline maintain and improve their mental acuity and SARAD scores, memory and focus scores. So, from a holistic perspective, Mimeo is working under the surface to kind of optimize your cellular functionality. And what you should be able to get out of that is increased energy, increased mood, increased focus, reduced pain, and then those metabolic balancing effects as well.
Wow. That's a lot. I
It
mean,
is a lot.
that's amazing. I mean, it's basically anything that's affiliated to aging cells and aging body and
Right,
whatnot.
exactly.
Um, so of course you can't make the claim that this is going to prevent, cancer or Parkinson's or any of
No,
these
of
very
course
severe
not.
diseases. But um, but by essentially theoretically, if your cells are healthy, then it's just harder to get the diseases. Is that right? Is that a right assumption or?
Yeah, I think that would be the right assumption. You know, cellular health is really the underlying component of whole body health, right? Like if you have healthier cells, then by and large, the rest of your body is just going to function much better. And as our cellular health declines, that's kind of the underlying factor that leads to all disease states and aging in general, because, you know, we're made up of and like totally operated by our cells, even though we don't think about them all the time. So, one of the reasons why I think that Mimeo is so cool is because it is one of the only supplements, and actually, I don't even have to say one of the only, I can say the only supplement that is biomimetic and recreating what's actually happening in the human body. So we're kind of leveraging thousands of years of evolutionary knowledge in order to create this supplement, because it's not just like we're combining random plant extracts or chemicals together and just kind of hoping that they have some kind of context within human health. We're actually taking the body's own regenerative systems and this, you know, evolutionarily conserved longevity bio program of fasting and putting it in people's hands so that they can actually, you know, turn it on and activate it on demand rather than having to fast to achieve it. So instead of these molecules were not only like evolutionarily designed to work within the human body, that's, you know, where they exist, they have a role to play and a function to do, but they were also evolutionarily designed to work together to perform, you know, this more holistic functionality and activate these complementary pathways that operate synergistically to enhance whole body health like that.
My God, it's really incredible. I mean, I don't even know how your mind goes there to like even say that this is something that can is feasible, which I think is amazing. I mean, I've only been taking it for a few days, and it's so funny that you say, you know, that it can act as um, not as a suppressant, but I do have noticed that I'm not as hungry, and
Great.
I thought I didn't know why. I didn't until you actually said it, to be honest. But I would eat lunch just because it's time to eat lunch, not because I was hungry. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I was like, so now I'm just like, oh, then maybe I don't have to eat if I'm not really hungry. But I'm so
Yeah.
trained.
No, I well exactly. And see, this is the really interesting thing that you kind of have to unlearn when you get into the fasting world. Because I remember the first time that I ever did my first day of fasting, I was convinced that I was gonna die. Right? Like, oh my gosh, like like one day without food. Like, how is this possible? How can anybody do this? But you do it for the first time, and then you feel like incredibly empowered. I'm just like, oh, I guess everything that I was taught was just a total lie, right? That like we can go long periods of time without food and still be like active and healthy and even more healthy than we were before. And so kind of unlearning that societal influence of you have to eat on a regimented schedule or else your body will like start eating itself, right? That was
Right.
the big myth that I was always like terrified of like, oh no, I don't want my stomach to like dissolve into itself. But yeah,
Right.
once you kind of like break those bonds, then you really realize that I should be eating food when like my body tells me it's the right time, or when it's like, you know, really worth it to me, and not just some regimented schedule that I have to adhere to. You know, food should be like a joyful component of life, not a drudgery or just like a, you know, a scheduled like punch in punch out kind of deal.
Right, exactly. And I did notice that the instructions are to take um, two pills daily at the first meal.
Right.
So
Yeah.
why so
So
much? Why is that important?
yeah, absolutely. So the reason why we have that on the package is because of the clinical trial that we did with the Mimeo formulation. So in order to, you know, when we initially discovered the formulation, we saw that it could recapitulate the effects of fasting in human cells, which was great. We saw that it could extend lifespan in C. elegans, which was great. But we wanted to make sure that when we actually gave it to people as a supplement, we would still get those effects. So we did a small pilot clinical study where we had people come in one day and eat a standardized breakfast alongside a placebo control, and then looked at their plasma functionalities. Or we had those same 5 people after a week washout come in, eat that same standardized breakfast, but with supplementation with Mimeo, and then assess their plasma functionalities again over this 6 hour postprandial time course. And what we found was that when people ate the meal on its own, there was this, very typical loss of plasma functionality. So their plasma became more pro-inflammatory. It was less antioxidant. It was less cardioprotective, and all that's, very much in line with the typical post-prandial, post-eating response. You have all this foreign material that's coming in from the food, all this metabolic chaos that's happening from the fats and the sugars coming into the body, and it just kind of throws the system out of whack, and it has to respond so that it can clean up all of that metabolic damage that's happening. But what we found was that when we had that same standardized breakfast, but with supplementation with Mimeo, we could not only prevent all of that loss of function, but actually add gains of function on top of that that mimicked what we saw when people were actually fasting in the previous study. So their plasma became, instead of pro-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory. It was more cellular protective, more antioxidant. It actually increased their cardioprotective ability, their plasma cholesterol efflux ability. And that's just within 2 hours of taking Mimeo. So there are these immediate acute effects that when you take Mimeo with food, we can kind of prevent a lot of these negative effects of eating, avoid that, the brain fog, this metabolic chaos that's being thrown around. We can help keep your heart healthier with the cardioprotective effects. So yeah, just really avoiding a lot of the negative effects of eating, essentially using your body's fasting pathways as this counterbalance to the fed pathways that are being overstimulated after a meal.
So you've been very generous. For anybody who wants to give Mimeo a try, they can get a promo code, discount code, which I will put down below. Um, and to, yeah, so I just feel like I have 2 months worth that I'm going to give this a try, and I'll be very svelte, and
Well,
and my cells will be like
miles.
crazy booming. Um, but yeah, so I guess so in terms of when people start to take this, right? So I've only been on this for a couple of days now. Um, are there, like, aside from taking an actual blood test,
Right.
um, what effects should they start to feel? I'm assuming that they'll start to feel some sort of effects, or is it really
Right.
just through a blood test and seeing your numbers?
Well, the blood test and seeing your numbers, that's definitely going to be, the most accurate, the most scientific way. That's also where, I'm going to be able to, go back to clinical studies and be like, yes, you should be able to see your glucose changing around, your triglycerides changing around, your cholesterol changing around, or, various markers of immune health or cardiovascular health. There's really good data. And that's where I would be able to say, yes, if you can track those things, that's where you should be able to see changes. But in terms of the holistic benefits that people might be able to feel over time. We've had people who, with arthritis, who have shown us that, like, in the morning, this was my range of motion. I took Mimeo, and then the day, like, a couple hours later, like, this was my range of motion. So there's this pain relief element, the anti-inflammatory component to it as well. But just generally speaking, we've had folks tell us that they feel more motivated, more focused, more energized to get stuff done. They have that hunger suppression effect. We've heard that from a lot of different people. That's kind of one of the major things that's been happening. Definitely the pain relief elements, but then also elevation of mood is something that we hear a lot. That just people feel a bit more happy, just a bit more balanced. Um, I can certainly say from my experience with Mimeo, especially with the ups and downs of startup life and, founding a company, it's definitely helped keep me like much more just stable and happy and focused on what I need to do. And then there's also elements of exercise performance and recovery as well. So we've had a lot of people taking Mimeo who are extreme endurance athletes, cyclists and marathon runners and weightlifters who have taken it, around an hour before they really needed to perform. And they told us that it was a game changer for them, that they were able to perform better for longer, and actually set a couple like personal records on the courses that they were doing or the weights that they were lifting. So we've just seen like a lot of holistic benefits that come out of Mimeo. And in terms of, when you would start to see them, some people are pretty sensitive to the molecules. So, PEA and OEA specifically, they have those more acute effects that you can feel within around, 1 to 2 hours of taking them if you're sensitive to it. While other people who are not as sensitive, need a bit more time where they didn't feel effects at first, but after around, 3 weeks to a month of supplementation, we're then able to come back and tell us like, yeah, I actually can really tell the difference of when I'm on it versus when I'm not on it.
Wow, that is so cool. So as we wrap this up, so if people want to learn more about you, Chris, or follow Mimeo, where do they go on all the socials?
Yeah, great question. If they want to learn more about me specifically, you can actually check me out on TikTok. I'm at That Nutrition Doctor, where I have around 145,000 followers there, and just like a lot of fun facts about nutrition from my days of being a graduate student in nutritional biochemistry. Talk a lot about fasting. If they want to learn more about Mimeo, everything is at Mimeo Health, Insta, LinkedIn, Facebook, all the hashtags on Insta. And then you can also check us out at mimeohealth.com to really learn more about the product itself and kind of go through the whole scientific journey that I talked about here. But if you want to read it for yourself and like be able to quote it, screenshot it, share it widely, whatever you want to do.